Shirley Toulson, born in England, is a poet, author, as well as editor. Her works include diverse titles such as The Celtic Year, Celtic Journeys, and Walking Round Wales. She has also published collections of poetry such as The Fault, Dear Brutus, and Shadows in an Orchard. Her poem, A Photograph, is based on a photograph of her mother. The poem is a nostalgic recollection of her mother and her aunts, shot through with a strong sense of loss at the death of her mother. Here is a summary of the poem A Photograph by Shirley Toulson. The poet describes a photograph on cardboard that she is looking at. The photograph shows 3 cousins who went on a seaside holiday. In the photograph, 2 young girls are holding the poet's mother's hand. The poet's mother, at around 12 years, is older than the other girls. The photograph shows all 3 girls standing still on the beach, smiling through their wet hair at their uncle who was clicking the photograph. The poet reminisces that her mother was sweet-looking before she, the poet, was born. The poet observes that the sea which laps at the feet of the happy girls seems to have remained constant, as opposed to the girls who changed considerably as they grew older. The poet recollects how some 20 or 30 years after the photograph was taken, her mother would laugh looking at the photograph. She would ask the poet to look at Betty and Dolly, the 2 other girls in the photograph, and comment on how their parents had dressed them for the trip to the beach. The poet, recalling this laughter of her mother, remarks that the holiday by the sea was her mother's past, but her mother's laughter on looking at the snapshot is a part of the poet's past. Both her mother's laughter and the memory of the laughter are tinged with the awareness of loss. Her mother laughed at the memory of a lost childhood, and the poet experiences loss by calling to mind the laughter that she can hear no more. She calls this labored ease, signifying the effort that has to be made to deal with any loss. In the final stanza, the poet says that her mother has been no more for nearly 12 years, and her mother in the photograph was nearly 12. Thinking of this strange coincidence, the poet falls silent, owing to the immense loss that she feels. The 2 characters in the poem, A Photograph, are the poet herself and her mother. Click each label to know more about the characters. The poet loves her mother a lot. This is brought out by the emotional reaction that she has to the photograph of her mother's childhood. The poet is left speechless by the loss that she experiences on realizing that her mother has been dead for the past 12 years. Coincidentally, her mother was also around 12 years old in the photograph. The intense love that the poet feels for her mother is also demonstrated by the fact that her mother's laughter is starkly etched in the poet's memory. The poet's mother exists in the poem only as a memory in the poet's mind. The poet's mother in the photograph is older than her cousins and comes across as a responsible older sister. This is evinced in the manner both her younger cousins hold on to her hands in the photograph. Now let us examine the poem closely. The setting of the poem, A Photograph, reflects 3 phases of life. The photograph itself was taken on the beach. Later, the poet's mother would look at the photograph at home 20 or 30 years after it was taken. The poem itself, which talks about these memories, is written some 12 years after the death of the poet's mother. The dominant theme of the poem, A Photograph, is a combination of nostalgia and realization of loss. The photograph in focus in the poem is a repository of memories. It serves as a nostalgic reminder to the poet's mother of her childhood with its specific incidents and facts. The photograph also serves to emphasize the passage of time and of loss of childhood that the poet's mother acknowledges with wry laughter. For the poet, the photograph serves as a reminder of the time when her mother had laughed on seeing it. The photograph, as well as the poem itself, embodies both nostalgic remembrance and the loss associated with those memories. The tone of the poem reflects the theme too. It is contemplative to begin with, strongly tinged with nostalgia. As the poem progresses, the sense of loss becomes stronger. The poem finally ends on a note of deep grief. The poem is written in free verse. It neither has a rhyme scheme nor a regular rhythm. The use of free verse creates the impression of a memory being narrated as it is recollected in fragments and long run-on sentences. One can read in the first stanza, which has detailed descriptions of the setting of the photograph, the poet's emotional distance from the events in the photograph. In the second stanza, involving the poet's own memory, the sentences are fewer and terser. The third stanza is short and compact, almost literally ending with silence, as the poet contemplates her mother's death. The poem is peppered with figures of speech. The poet uses alliteration to emphasize certain ideas and to add rhythm to the poem. For instance, in the first stanza, she uses the expression terribly transient to talk of the people in the photograph, emphasizing change and death. Here, the consonant T sound is repeated. In the second stanza, she uses the phrase labored ease of loss to highlight the tone and emotion. Note how the consonant L has been repeated in the words labored and loss. In the final stanza, the near repetition silence silences creates a final numbing effect. Another figure of speech used in the poem is transferred epithet, where the adjective that is used qualifies a noun other than the one which it is meant to qualify. In the expression transient feat, it is not the feat, but the experience which is transient. This use of the transferred epithet emphasizes the impermanent nature of the people who have had the experience. These lines also have an example of personification, where the poet gives the sea the human quality of washing the feet of the children in the photograph. Also, the poet talks of the sea as a person who hasn't changed. The poet has used an oxymoron, a combination of two contrasting ideas in the phrase labored ease. This highlights the conflicting emotions of pleasant nostalgia and painful loss experienced by the poet and her mother when viewing the photograph.